to welcome everybody to the second episode of Jump Off the Dock podcast. I want to first thank Daniel behind the scenes, running the cameras and the sound, and got a special guest today that we're going to be interviewing, somebody that I spent a lot of time with over the years, the last 42 actually, my identical twin brother. So Travis, welcome to the podcast, buddy.
Better looking brother. I appreciate it. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, that's not what everybody says. So tell us a little bit about what you do, like how you got to where you're at now in the seat with Armor One. Talk to me a little bit about your journey to where you're at now as director of national assessments for Armor One.
Well, if you'd told my 22-year-old, 23-year-old self that I would be doing what I'm currently doing, I would have been like, there's no way. So way back in 2007, which seems forever ago, started out working for the sheriff's office and did some time on the road there, and which ultimately led to me taking a job with the Secret Service and being an agent with them. But that
was kind of a funny story how you got that role. Wasn't it like some counterfeit money or something?
Yeah. My ultimate goal when I was in college was to always try to go federal, but they made it so hard back in the mid-2000s. And so, yeah, I was working the road and got a call from a gospel company that kind of sold books and songs and lyrics and music just right near here, kind of up on Rutherford Road. And
Daniel, did you own that company?
No.
Oh, okay.
No, I got fired from there twice.
Her landscaper had actually went out to mow the lawn and hit what he thought was just trash and debris. And when he hit the stack of papers, it throwed counterfeit printed money all over the yard. So he immediately stopped and began collecting it up. They called us. We went out, collected it took me about 2 hours to get all the papers and the money, and had a pretty big box full, and went and turned it in our property and evidence and wrote the initial, incident report. And it was our policy to at least contact the on-call Secret Service agent and just say, hey, this is what we have. It's in property and evidence, and here's the case number. And
because Secret Service, they're the ones that handle counterfeit and all that stuff.
They do. They do a lot of counterfeit currency and also counterfeit, what they call it, access device, but it's credit cards. So anything over a certain threshold, they'll investigate that too. And so did my job, went and turned it in, and then the agent called the next day and wanted to know, or basically just said, hey, good job, appreciate this. I went and got the evidence out, good report. If there's anything I can do, please let me know. Well, I thought that was an opportunity, maybe at least strike up conversation. And so I told the lady, I said, I need a job, word for word. And so she started laughing, and she's like, well, do you have a degree? And I was like, yeah, I've got a bachelor's degree. And she's like, well, why are you working for the local police department? I was like, well, because you tell us that we got to have experience. You can't just leave college and go straight to the feds at that point. And she's like, well, can you be up here Monday and talk to our RAC, resident agent in charge? And I was like, absolutely. So put on my three-piece suit and my tie.
Which doesn't happen very often, by the way.
It doesn't happen. I mean, look at me.
Yeah.
Got rid of the hat and spruced up my 3 twigs of hair on my head, and took my country bumpkin butt down to Greenville and walked in. And the first thing the RAC said was, take your tie off and let's sit down and have a conversation. Didn't talk about law enforcement, didn't talk about the Secret Service, didn't talk about being a special agent. Just had a conversation about life and family, and found out later he was just wanting to know me and person, and would I be a good fit for the agency. And so when I got ready to leave, he's like, put your application in, let me know. And he said, every application that comes that's hired in this particular region comes across my desk, and then he sends it basically to HR for recruiting. And so I went home and filled out the application, sent him an email, called him later that night, said, hey, my application's in. And he's like, I've got it already. And 23 months later, I was a special agent. So got hired with them and went through about 8 months of training. And then, as you know better than anybody, our father passed away unexpectedly. Wrestled with that back and forth for several months trying to decide what was going to be best for me and you and the family, and ultimately decided that I had to tender my resignation from the Secret Service and move back home. And, hindsight 2020, but looking back, that was a great move. And, I really truly feel like that, God has a plan for us, and everything happens for a reason. We may not understand that reason or know that reason. And be quite frankly, there's probably a lot of times we don't need to know that reason, or if we knew that reason, we would be scared to death to do it. And
yeah, I mean, you're right. I mean, think who would ever thought that we would be sitting at a table at a podcast, at 42, talking about leadership and things in life and how we got here, and right. And the reason I'm asking you to tell your background is because the conversation we're going to have today in a little bit really renders on that experience and how the things that you've seen through your lens and the things that you've done over the course of the last 42 years, right? That experience and the lens and how that's brought us to this conversation today. So you was at the Secret Service, you came, your dad passed away, you got back home, and then your journey from there really was like a rocket ship kind of in a way, wasn't it?
It was, and I'll tell you funny, talk about God laying that plan out for us. Like when I first went to work for the sheriff's office, or thought that was what I wanted to do. Applied, went through the interview process and got hired. I found out that I was going to be working swing shifts. And at the time, Noelle was pregnant with our first kid. Yeah. And Gavin was due the same week I was scheduled to graduate the police academy. And, both of us being new parents, and with Noelle, which is my wife, having him at home, and I was really concerned how that was going to play out with me swinging shifts. And so, crazy thing is, as I was in the police academy leading up to graduation and starting to work at the sheriff's office, the supervising sergeant over what they called Echo Platoon at the sheriff's office, which was a permanent 2-to-2 shift with no swinging, came into her work and got to talking to her about a phone. And that's when the iPhones were just really getting hot and coming out, and she helped him, and they struck up conversation about the sheriff's office. And little did I know, she was picking his brain to really kind of try to learn how that was going to affect our family environment. And so they got talking. Well, he was supervising sergeant on Echo, that non-swing shift. They got to talking, and he said, have Travis call me. And so got to talking, and I talked to him and talked to that lieutenant, and they ultimately, at Christmas, right before we went back to the police academy, was able to move me platoons, and which I was grateful for. I say all that to say this. I tendered my resignation at the Secret Service, called the sheriff and said, hey, can I come back? And he was like, absolutely, you can start tomorrow. So to bring this all back full circle, I started back at the sheriff's office. I worked the road for 6 months. That same supervising sergeant that my wife talked to and that I talked to help my family, he was then the supervising sergeant in school enforcement at the sheriff's office.
It's amazing to see, like you're talking about how, and Daniel, we kind of talked about this last week on the first episode, was the journey that God has in store for us, and how Jump Off the Dock podcast came to be, but ultimately how Leading Impact got here, and how that journey is laid out if we just let go of the pen and let him author the story. And, Daniel, when Daniel asked me last week, right, and he said, Leading Impact, how did it get here, right? And we talked about that, right? And we said unapologetically, this isn't a spiritual podcast, but we're not going to apologize for knowing that God's got a story for us, and that, as we lead and we live out and lead in that conviction, right? Amazing how God has a story already pre-written for us. And if we just let go of the pen and let him write it, like amazing things happen like that.
Which is really hard for type A personalities like myself to do, because I'm a very much, I want to be in control. So going back full circle, he is now, when I come back to the sheriff's office, he is now the supervising sergeant over school enforcement. And just a real quick background, school enforcement, since the school district is so big, 830 square miles, 116 facilities, they encompass, 80,000 kids on their largest years, and then 12,000 to 13,000 full-time employees. But if you count substitutes and substitute bus drivers and things of that sort that you have to also account for, you're pushing 22,000. So to say all that, when I came back, I worked the road for 6 months. He reached out and he said, "Hey, any interest in coming over to school enforcement?" And at the time, school enforcement was where you would go to die. We'd joke about it. If you want to retire and not do nothing, go to school enforcement. And he said, "You want to come to school enforcement?" I said, no way am I coming over there. At the time, we're talking it's 2012. I'm still, as far as law enforcement goes, full of piss and vinegar. I want to hit the streets. And he was like, "I'm really trying hard to change the face of this unit." He's like, we've had Columbine at that point, and various other active shooters in schools, and we hadn't got to the Parklands and things of that sort. But he really understood at that point, we really have got to change the face of what school enforcement is. It doesn't need to be a graveyard. It really needs to be a very productive, very active unit in the sheriff's office. And so he was like, "I really need you to come over here. Would you do it?" Now, ton of respect for this guy. A lot of respect because he had always done what he said he was going to do. Great supervisor, great friend outside of the sheriff's office. And so finally I told him, I was like, "Yeah, I'll come do it." So, and that's really in 2012, I had law enforcement background, but really in 2012 is when I really started the journey in the school space, in the K-12 space, in that space that ultimately would lead to what I'm doing now. And so I spent a little over 6 years in that school enforcement unit where we were over employee investigations. We investigated any kind of child crimes involving the schools, crossing guards, juvenile gang investigator, juvenile investigator, K-9, narcotics detection. And so we were, in that unit, we were probably about 50 strong. They're close to almost 80 now. So started out just as a school resource officer, but ended up getting promoted twice in 2 years and ended up supervising that unit for about 4 years, 4.5 years. And really learned a lot, school law, how to deal with children, how to deal with educators, because it is a super fine line when you start to mesh law enforcement and education together.
Right.
It's not just the political aspects of both sides, but you have an educator most educators who really do try to put kids first. And then you have that aspect of, we're seeing them, and usually on the law enforcement side, we're seeing them and the children usually when something's wrong.
Yeah.
Right. Not a whole lot of good. And so we really started focusing on how can we build the bridge of, hey, we're not just around for bad, we're here for good. And so really worked hard for that. And then back in 2018, the school district really was doing a panic drill, an active shooter drill at the district office when they activated the panic button, and nothing happened really. And it was people. It was a failure on people's part. And we'll get to people in a little bit, but they activated the panic button. Well, the school district at the time had a 24/7, 365 monitoring center, which they still do, and they called that security. But really a false sense. Really no security there, just monitoring. And so they hit the panic button, and the dispatcher and monitors inside the security center, that they called it, received the panic button, but never done anything with it. Well, the fire department and the police department were at the district office with the superintendent.
When they mashed the panic button.
When they mashed the panic
gotcha.
button. Pressed the panic button. Mashed it. We
mash buttons. We don't press buttons.
So
here.
they mashed.
we mashed the button.
They mashed that panic button, and nothing happened. So the superintendent called down to the monitoring center and said, "Did y'all get a panic button?" "Oh yeah, I've called the police department." Well, they hadn't called the police department. The police department was standing with the superintendent. So he literally got in his car, drove down to the security center, and everybody in there got whacked. And so it was that point when him and the other district leadership at the time was like, okay, I think it's time we hire someone to supervise security. Okay. Now.
And enrolls you.
Enrolls me, but let's go back to this God thing and the plan laid out and how
right.
This is really a calling, not a job, right?
Right.
They post a job in the summer of 2017 and interview, and they don't hire. Well, at the time, I had received a phone call and asked would I be interested in the job. Now, I loved my job in school enforcement. I loved supervising those guys. I had a really good job. And so I said no. Okay, so I was one. In January of 2018, beginning of January of 2018, they posted the job and interviewed again. Okay. I got a phone call. Would you be interested in this job? 2 times. No, I don't think so. They interviewed, didn't hire anybody, they closed it. In the beginning of February, they reopened the job for a 3rd time and interviewed again. At the time, and then I got the 3rd phone call. Are you sure and are you positive you don't think you want this job? Well, so at the time I was like, well, you know what? At least I can go see what they have to say. I can go through the interview process, and then I don't have to what if myself to death.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So I go down and talk to the gentleman who's going to be hiring the position to kind of pick his brain. We had a decent relationship, and he, at the time, I didn't know this, but he was a pastor. He pastored a church as well as was over operations. And so he and I got to talking, and he was like, we've posted this 3 times. And he was like, what's going on? So I told him. And I was like, well, I got the phone calls, didn't really feel like it was right, da-da-da-da-da. And he said, you mean the Lord put this on your plate 3 separate times and you ain't eat of it yet? And he freaking gut punched me.
Yeah.
He just hauled off and gut punched me. And so I left, went back to the office, sat in my office, big crocodile tears going down my face like, man, I think he's right.
Yeah.
And so I called Noelle, and I was like, hey, something's churning. I don't know what it is, but something's not right.
And the Holy Spirit had a hold
She was
of it.
like, well, let's talk about it when you get home. Got home, talked about it. And I ain't going to get into the details, but the pay band they were offering at the time was equal, a little bit more than what I was making at the sheriff's office salary to salary, but with side jobs and opportunities outside of my full-time responsibility, there were opportunities to make extra money. And so money to money, it was not. And I told him, I was like, I'm really torn because stepping out on faith, trying to figure out, I'm the breadwinner here, those conversations. And so I came in the next day and had a sticky note on my desk. And all I had was a number on it. Didn't have who it was from, had no idea what it was. And so I called him and I said, was you in my office? He's like, that's the last night. He said, that's it. I can't do no more than that. And I was like, I'm in. Let's do it. So that was in February of 2018. I stayed with the sheriff's office through that semester just because the way the logistics work. Stayed through that and then went to work with them in June of 18.
So you became the director of security for the school district, and really built that from the ground. Really built it from the ground up. And how many employees did you start with?
At the time,
was under you?
Yeah, at the time we started there, we had 14.
And what'd you end it with?
51.
Yeah, I knew the conversation we had that department had grown drastically under your guidance, under your leadership, in that journey. So, to speed up a little bit so we can get into to the conversation that we really want to get into. After those 5 or 6 years as a district, this opportunity with Armored One came about.
We had partnered with Armored One to do some work in the district. They really provide some really good solutions and really full of integrity. They don't really ambulance chase like most of these vendors and contractors out there. I mean, we offer active shooter certified film and glass, active shooter training online and in person, and then ultimately the division that I'm over, security consultations and security assessments. And but they're really servant-hearted, and just like when Uvalde happened in Texas, our CEO went down there, and I'll talk a little bit more about this, but our CEO went down there and really helped them out, and Armored One ended up donating glass and film to the school district, and with no cost, and so the God working in mysterious ways. They did work for us, and after about 2 years of him and I building a relationship, he asked would I be interested in coming to work for him, and I said no, I like it where I'm at. No. He's like, you need to come work for me. You need to come work for me, and I just kept saying no, I don't, no. And through a series of events at another district where he lives in South Carolina, he lives at the coast, through a series of events, there was an opportunity that I thought was going to be there for me to interview for another school district's executive director in security and emergency management. And they were struggling pretty bad. I knew some of the board members down there. Anyway, they reached out. And so I really, going into that job, wanted somebody outside of my circle, so to speak, to give me a job reference. So I reached out to him and said, you kind of know me. You know me on the job, but you know me outside of, my supervisor or a peer. Would you give me a reference? And he said, I'm hiring you before they will. And so he asked me when I was supposed to interview, and he beat him to the punch. And so now I'm over there, National Security Assessment and Consultation Division, travel the nation, and basically go into school districts. We focus on K-12, but I mean, heck, back in January I did the Nashville Zoo. So anybody that's willing to let us come in and try to help, we will. But let's go in and talk with leadership and staff and security and law enforcement, and we basically just assess their campuses and their buildings, their emergency management plans, emergency preparedness as a whole, and discuss what they're doing, how well they're doing it, and then we kind of identify any vulnerabilities. And then if they want us to, the consultation piece comes in, we kind of hold their hand through putting solutions to those vulnerabilities. And I tell them, I was like, my ultimate goal at Armored One ultimate goal is to move as many districts as we can to a proactive posture when it comes to safety, security, emergency management, emergency preparedness, and move them to a proactive posture instead of a reactive posture. And then on top of that, we're here to try to build castles and not prisons. That's what I tell people. It's like we need to do things to make sure that we are protecting our staff and our kids, but we need to do it in a way where it's warm and inviting and nurturing. A castle, right? You see castles all over the world, and they're like, man, that's beautiful. And you go in, it's warm, it's nurturing, and kings live there, queens live there, and not a prison where you look at it and go, man, the worst of the worst is there. So that's kind of how we look at it from my perspective. So so that's what I do now. I travel the nation and try to help districts or anybody really.
Thanks for listening to Jump Off the Dock. Visit leadingimpact.org for blogs and leadership resources. For questions or pricing, email Trey at leadingimpact.org. We are ready to help you flip fear to courage.